thing.
Oh.
Access is really good.
Our dear Father.
Memories and dates are not in here, but know that I love you, and I'm so sorry if we missed anything. But having said that, I want to introduce a little bit about my grandma, Iris Lorene Crowley. The beginning part is from her mother, Grandma's part. So Iris Lorene Crowley was born November 16th, 1932 to Iris Dean McCullough and Edwin Teason Crowley. Grandma McCullough said that our grandma, laughed on December 24th, 1932 was her first laugh the day before Christmas. Grandma walked at 10 months old, and when I read that, I laughed because every baby in this family walks so early. And I'm like, that came from Grandma. At 10 months old, Grandma said, "Thank you, pretty baby, drink," and when she finds the milk bucket, she takes it to Daddy. She kisses the baby in the catalog, and she dances whenever music is played. They moved to Arkansas when she was 2, and my grandma told her grandma that she wanted to go back to Colorado. When she was 2, she said, "I am trying so hard to help Daddy make a living. She likes to do dishes, and she does a good job." Grandma was the oldest of 6 children. She was the oldest, and then it went Edwin Floyd, Wayne Dahl, Ralph, Doris and Bobby, and Donna. They were farmers and had responsibilities at a very young age. She raised chickens, cows, pigs, sheep, and had a gigantic garden. And Grandma always, every time I was with her, told me how wonderful Grandma McCullough's garden was. I'm gonna say Grandma McCullough even though she was Crowley, but to distinguish. She always said that Grandma could grow anything and it was delicious. And she got that from her mom for sure. They were sharecroppers, but they didn't own the land. Grandma was always a second mom to her siblings and to everyone. She cooked and sewed and took care of the garden. She milked cows every day, morning and night, and she was a hard worker. Now these next notes are from Grandma herself. In the fall of 1936, so she was 4, she began school in Pagosa, Colorado. She had to walk unless the weather was bad, and then Father would take her in the wagon. She would have lunch with Grandma Thiessen often, but Great Grandma Thiessen for us would call her Irene. She goes, I told your mother to name you Irene. In 1937, Grandma would have been about 5. The fields got flooded, and it said it left fish alive. It left the field alive with fish. They collected fish, canned the fish, and fed it to the pigs. No fish went to waste. It was a sight she'll never forget. Also that year, they moved into a 1-room house by the river. She walked a narrow trail to school. When it was icy, her dad would carry her to school. I think that's so sweet. In 1938, Annie Elizabeth bought Lorene a blue mare. And then she would ride 5 or 6 miles to school, and she named it Bluebell. In 7th grade, they moved to the valley, and she worked in the orchards. She graduated 8th grade in Ignacio is what I've always heard it, but is it Ignacio? I don't remember. So I'm going to call it Ignacio, so sorry if I ruined that beautiful city. She had a full and happy childhood. She was a 4-H member, raised calves and sheep, sewed, cooked, square danced, modeled, and did interior design. She earned many ribbons and awards, which she did in St. John's too, so I believe it. In 4-H, she did 4-H campouts every year, and she had responsibilities of milking, watching cows and sheep, lambing, and also cooking and canning at home. Ignacio is where her sweet brother Wayne passed away, and she began high school there, north of Ignacio. And she rode Bluebell to school all the time. Her sophomore year, they moved to Allison, and she rode a school bus or her horse when the weather was bad. Okay, this cracked me up because I had to look this up. She had muskrat traps that she would set before and after school. Can you imagine our sophomores right now setting traps for muskrats? And she had to skin and stretch the hides to get her pay. And if she left them for her father, he would get them. So she made sure she did them. I can't imagine. In May of 1950, Grandma graduated high school, and later that month she married Francis Engler, and they lived in Allison. May 3rd of 1951, Billy Nadine was born, and she quoted, "She brought happiness to them," as did Billy did all of us. In 1952, Ernest left the farm and worked in Florida, and later they moved to Farmington, where he drove a truck for an oil rig. November 17th, 1953, Janet Arlene was born, and I'm sure the heavens sang. Janet was born. In December of that year, they moved to Casper, Wyoming, and in February, Ernest moved to Casper, and she joined him later in February when Janet was old enough to travel. June 14th, 1955, my dad, Ronald Eugene, was born, and a year later, sweet Uncle Dan was born on June 29th, 1956, Daniel Dean, after Grandma McCullough. This was a crazy story to me. I can't imagine after having a baby, that same year, 1956, Grandma got hepatitis and was confined to bed. She moved to Colorado to stay with her mom, and 3 of the 6 months that she was there, she was bedridden. Can you imagine having a baby and having that? Grandma made all their clothes growing up. In April of 57, she moved back to Wyoming, and then later that year in 57, her and Ernest got divorced. The divorce was final. After the divorce, Grandma moved back to Colorado, where her mother helped her take care of the children while she supported her kids by waiting at a diner and did laundry for workers. And did any of you remember the story of Grandma always telling us she would wrap her kids on her when she would do laundry, and people got mad that she would do that to her children. But I would do that too. You were doing laundry, you don't want your kids to run off. June 6, 1959, Grandma married Deward Eugene Woodrome and boys. We're so happy about that. Deward had 3 beautiful children. Karen Kay, Larry Eugene, and Evelyn Paulette joined the family. In June of 1960, beautiful Iris Maxine was born. And that year, spring of that year, Grandpa got sick and his lung collapsed. Most of the next 5 years, he was spent a patient in bed. In October 15th, 1962, Ricky Lynn was born. January of the next year, of 63, Grandma moved to Kansas, hoping the climate would help Jean. But I have a parenthesis in here that Janet was really grateful that they didn't stay there, and I've heard that from my dad too. That they were happy that in September they moved back to Colorado. When Grandma was in Cortez, she wallpapered the house with newspaper because it was so awful, and it was a rental house. I can totally see Grandma doing that. The next section is from Janet. Janet gave me these notes. When they lived in Colorado, there was season asparagus. It was the season for asparagus. And they would grow on the fences, and we would go in the country and pick asparagus from along the fence. We picked big tubs of asparagus. We would bring it home, and she would freeze it. We would eat it all year long. And she remembers having a snake come while out, and she ran to the car and wouldn't pick anymore. And Grandma hated snakes too. We all know Grandma mentioned how much she hated snakes. They would pick fruit on the shares, and they would pick like 5 bushels and take 1 home. So the seasons they would do apples, peaches, pears, and go home and can it. They also went to Grandma Crowley's and worked in her garden and played. And then we got food from their gardens. And I love reading about the gardens because I know that Grandma always talked about her mother's garden, and my dad did too. He talked about how they would help. She would always make it a game. It was a fun thing to do with Grandma. In July of 65, they decided to move to Arizona. When they moved to Arizona, they got a trailer and brought a deep freeze and everything we could fit in the trailer, and that was it. While there, Grandpa got better, his lung inflated, and he was able to go back to work. He started driving a city bus, and Grandma worked for Motorola. They bought their first home in Phoenix. Janet shares a story that when they moved to when they moved to Arizona, we picked pecans of the shares, and Dan fell out of a tree and broke his arm. They also picked grapes. Grandma and Grandpa were very spontaneous. They would say, "Okay, hop in the car. We're going to see Grandma," and they would grab their blankets and stuff and just hop in the car and go. No planning. And they would go to drive-in movies sometimes as well. Okay, I love this story. So Janet shares a story that when she was 15 or 16, Grandma decided she wanted to bring Christmas to an orphanage in Mexico. She made like 100 dolls and beanbag frogs. Dad went to stores and got donations like food and toys. We got donations of clothes and food from ward members and the community. We went to Mexico and had Christmas with the orphanage. It was amazing. Mom did so much work. We helped to stuff the dolls, but Mom did so much work. Isn't that amazing? Grandma always had a quilt on the frame. She always was making quilts and gifts for aunts and friends. She was making stuff but never kept it for herself. She would hand quilt and sell them for thousands of dollars. She was definitely afraid of snakes. I have that in my thing. When they lived in Phoenix, she would raise mushrooms to make money. She didn't make much money, but it was delicious. And she marinated them and fried them with eggs, and they had such good mushrooms. In the summer of 72, they decided to take a summer of vacation. So they took leave of their jobs for the whole summer, and they took a load of Arizona watermelons and sold them along the way to Colorado. They bought and sold wagons and buggies. They worked for Wild Bill's Antique Store in Montrose, Colorado, fixing wagons for him and trading junk for junk. They bought a team of donkeys and took pictures of families driving the covered wagons around. They carried tents and supplies with them riding the covered wagons through the hills and camped along the way. They even had chickens. They stayed in Colorado for 3 months, visiting family and riding the covered wagons. All the children learned to drive and harness a team. They drove in parades to Montrose, Durango, and Ignacio. The boys could almost call themselves experts in wagon restoration. And we even have pictures as kids. I think I'm a baby in a picture with him and a donkey. So they loved it. Jean had 3 running gears: a spring wagon, a doctor's buggy, and a covered wagon. All of these were brought back to Arizona. They would drive the truck with watermelons, sell it along the way, and then would bring a wagon back. They went on a couple treasure hunts, which I know what that means, because Grandma would always, they would be like, hey, get in the car, we're going on a treasure hunt. In the June of 72, Billy got married, and the same year, in November, Janet was married. Grandma made their wedding dresses, the bridesmaid dresses, and the cakes for the weddings, and they were beautiful. She did so many cakes. We all know Grandma's cakes. After Billy and Janet were married, I love this story. They found a shirt factory, and they went dumpster diving constantly. We used the extra fabric to make quilts, and Mom made a shirt and skirt that she wore to work, and everyone wanted one. So then she made skirts and shirts and sold them to everyone at work. That is such a good story. In spring of 73, they sold their home in Phoenix and bought a market in Florence that they would name Woody's Market. They kept the store for 6 years. Jean worked while Lorene and the kids ran the store. Grandma Peterson stayed with them for 3 summers. Or 3 winters. Sorry, for 3 winters. Ron and Mike and Uncle Dan completed successful missions. Later on, Grandpa was hospitalized in Casa Grande with kidney stones and got very sick while they were living in Florence, and so they had to sell the market in 78. Not too long after they sold it, they bought a motorhome and parked it at Janet's house in Mesa when Grandma went back to work in Motorola. Jean was working at the prison. I remember them living in the blue house in Gilbert, and I have lots of fun memories of them in Gilbert, and every Christmas, which I hope to continue this tradition of Grandma and Grandpa dressing up as Santa and Mrs. Claus, and her hand making every single one of the stockings that had a candy cane. I remember little books in mine sometimes, but all kinds of little trinkets in there, and we have Christmas all the time in that blue house. I remember her bathroom always having little beautiful powder, antique little, like 1920s little makeup displays, and I would go in there and pretend like I was like rich and in her blue house in Gilbert. In 1987, Grandpa was baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, this next little bit, I'm not going to remember dates really well because we were trying to figure it out. But I remember my family moved to St. John's in 1988. And I think it was our first Christmas there. It was the night before Christmas, and we were all getting ready for bed, and we heard bells outside of our door. And us kids were like, what do we do? What do we do? There's someone outside the door. And my mom's like, open it. And I think they stood out there forever, but we opened the door and it was Grandma and Grandpa dressed as Santa and Mrs. Claus coming to visit us for Christmas. And that was a dream. And it was within a year or two they moved to St. John. So it was like in the late 80s or early 90s. I think it was 89, but I'm not positive. So they moved to St. John's. They bought a little adobe house that was red, and I remember the entire family coming to help build it and to fix it up. And I remember playing with cousins, and we had a great time. And Grandma stuccoed it and painted it blue. So it was a little blue house on the corner. When we got together, they made it so nice. So Grandma, of course, she had her garden. And I remember her, if anyone remembers her little stool that had wheels, and she would wheel around to pick weeds, and Grandma was always pulling weeds out of that. And she loved her hens and her guineas. And every time we'd go to visit, she'd always have a bucket on the side, and we were about to go get it, and it would be a skunk in there. She'd have drowned, so it wouldn't kill her guinea. She was amazing. I remember in that house she had her beautiful pictures, which were displayed out there, of the big-eyed girls that were always in the bathroom. And I always would just sit there and look at those beautiful pictures. I remember her painting of, and she had it till to this day, of the man, Grandpa, with his granddaughter in the boat. That will always be Grandma's picture to me. When they lived in St. John's, Grandma would drive around and they would go pick up flagstone from the mountains, and she used it to make papers in her front yard. And those things were heavy, and Grandma and Grandpa did it in their white truck. I remember Grandpa's, was it a Chrysler? I was going to ask. I can't remember, but it had the big red couch. as a seat. Grandpa always loved his cars. Okay, where am I? Oh, Grandma always made amazing food. I remember as a child her homemade chicken soup and the thick noodles. We always looked forward to her making that, or her biscuits and gravy, always from scratch, and that was so impressive to me. Her pinoche fudge, all of her candy. Her candy thermometer was always up on her counter because she always was making something. Her dum-dums in the Halloween pumpkin, and even her great-grandkids and great-great-grandkids are going to remember her cookies when they gave Grandma a hug. She made memories for everyone. Grandma made a wishing well out of rocks that she would buy and collect, and it was a beautiful wishing well. Grandma was in the newspaper several times for her flowers, and especially her hollyhocks when they grew taller than her, which is not that hard to do, but we were impressed. I remember growing up, she had that picket fence, and we had a day where we brought all the cousins together to paint the white picket fence, and we had endless amounts of watermelon and ice cream ready for us as we painted her picket fence. Okay, I've already talked about that. I borrowed Grandma's typewriter so many times. I could go over there anytime I wanted, and she was always happy to see me. She would always be on her, I guess I looked it up. So her quilting, that big quilting thing was called a sewing right. Am I correct on that one? On her sewing right quilt frame, and she was hand quilting every quilt. She built her own cedar chest, and I remember, like, this reminds me, all these little buckles remind me of that cedar chest that when she worked so hard on that beautiful cedar chest and putting all these iron hooks on it, and she had it right where her cactus garden was. And we always remember Grandma and her cactus garden. This is a funny story. This is so Grandpa. So while they were in St. John's, we were always giving food out to people and helping others. And this one guy needed a job, and Grandpa hired him to build his kitchen cabinet. And anyway, I remember coming over, and Grandma was crying. And anyway, you looked at the cabinet, and it was not level at all. The doors wouldn't even shut tight, like it was. And she was always working on that cabinet, trying to fix it, and it never was working. But they kept it. But that's so Grandma and Grandpa, always helping out, even if it wasn't a licensed contractor at all. Grandma was always playing marbles, always playing cards, and had her friends over. I can't remember Barbara's husband. What's Barbara's husband? Huh? Al Stock. Al and Barbara were always over. We'd always go over there, and they always had someone over. And Grandma was making dinner. I remember stopping at Church's Chicken. Every time we would go on a trip, they had to stop at Church's Chicken. Grandma could do anything. One time her shower was running over, and she framed it and made a curve with concrete. So put the tile so it wouldn't spill out. She was an artist. She would go to the riverbed and she would pick up driftwood and arrange silk flowers into beautiful bouquets to sell. She made candles that she poured into handmade sand molds, and she sold those. I'm trying to remember before I remember motorhome rides to Colorado. They loved their family in Colorado. I remember their motorhome playing house in their motorhome all the time. And one time I was even throwing up the whole way, and Grandma was there, just as if I was important to her, even if I was deathly ill. I love my grandma. Grandpa got sick and lost a kidney. Then they eventually moved back to Mesa and bought a house. And in 2010, they moved into the mother-in-law suite with Aunt Janet. Grandma lived a full and happy life, and we will all remember how much Grandma loved us. I'll never forget the little things. Grandma saying, "Cammy, I love you." Her little swoop in her voice. And each one of my kids knew Grandma. She passed away peacefully on December 29th, 2022 at 90. And how grateful I am for Grandma. They posted in the back of all her posterity, but it's more than this. There's way more, but for numbers' sake. There was 9 children, 49 grandchildren, 133 great-grandchildren, and 5+ great-great-grandkids, one even being born yesterday. So it grows on and on. I want you to know how much I love each one of you and how grateful I am for Grandma bringing all of you into my life. I am grateful for Grandma and her example in what I aspire to be. I'm grateful for a Savior who's allowed us and did what he did so that we can be together again. And I look forward to the day when I can hug my grandma and tell her, Grandma, I love you. You're my favorite. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, show me how I can.
I know, he's so sweet.
Look at her, how cute they are. I wonder how old she was.
Grandma's cookies, huh? Yes, you can have it.